So, how did Pat learn the music himself? What led up to his involvement in the Adelaide Celtic music scene? Some of the story goes like this. Pat comes from a farming background in Lahinch in Ireland's County Clare. He first started learning tunes on a trial and error basis on a succession of wooden-tipped sea whistles he got as a child for Christmas. The first tune he learnt was one called Maggie in the Wood. It was, he says, a very informal way of learning. Once he had some tunes under his belt as a child, he was able to enter a music competition. Here's how Pat remembers it.
And eventually, I suppose I was 4 or 5, when I managed to get out a bit of Maggie in the Wood. And there was another lad next door to me. We were the same age. We used to sit outside in the shed and learn it off finger from, we couldn't read it. We would just be doing, if somebody had got it right, how'd you do that? And we'd follow it, and that's where it all started. And then when we were going to school, there was a group called Muintir na Tíre, which is the people of the country, I think it means. And they actually decided to give a prize for any young musicians. Just £3 was the first prize, £2 was the second one, and £1 was the third. So they arranged for this to happen at a social, and we had to play, and the fellow who was judging us was none other than Willie Clancy. So there was no sitting down and marking points. He was just sitting there talking to somebody, and he played a tune when you were ready. So I'd play a tune, then the other fellow played a tune, So eventually they said, there was no points, no markings or anything. So anyway, I won the £3. I think that must have been in about 1956 or 55, 56.
At around this time, Pat and his childhood friend Sean got further practice by going from house to house playing tunes for money. Money that went towards a social event for drinkers and non-drinkers, Pat calls the latter temperance, in line with an Irish custom of that time. Pat again.
So, me and Sean, you get to every house and play a tune, and they'd put some money in the tin, off to the next house, put some money in the tin, we'd play a tune. And then as we get a bit older, we went out with the big boys. Me and Sean would play the 2 whistles, and they would go in and dance a little short dance, and again it's the same idea. You put the bucket in front of them, and they would put a few pounds or a few shillings or whatever into it, and then we'd run a social early January, around about New Year's, I suppose it would have been. You collect, all the money you collected would buy all the necessaries for tea and cake, and there were so many temperates and so many drinkers. Like, you couldn't overflow the house with too many people, so it was strictly limited. If you were invited, you'd say no or yes. If you were a drinker, you'd have to pay £1 or something. You'd get your pound's worth, I can tell you that. As far as the drink went. The temperates just got tea and cake and maybe a bottle of lemonade.
Was this in the pub, was it?
No, this is a country house. I remember a few of them before I left there, and I don't think they do them anymore.
After that, there was a period of limited session playing as a young man in Wolverhampton in England, where Pat met Pauline, and then Adelaide, where the two settled as husband and wife. At this time, in the early 1970s, traditional Irish instrumental session playing was pretty much confined within the Irish community here in Adelaide. Pat explains.
We used to have a session once a week, basically, down at Tom Finn's in St. Peter's.
That was around 1971 when we came over.
Yeah, you know, Timmy Whelan. Martin Howley, Chris O'Callaghan. Who was the others? There was quite a few of them there, and they used to. Paddy Finn, Tom Finn. We'd have a session there. All the women would be up in the one room drinking tea, and we'd have a session in there, and they'd come in with a cup of tea to us as well. Even Mary Finn used to sometimes play the piano with us.
Later, old Tim Whelan moved the session into, for a brief period, the Mile End Hotel in Adelaide, and then into the Prince Albert Hotel, also in Adelaide, for a much longer period. It was at this point that the music really took off in the wider, earlier Adelaide folk scene. Pat remembers.
Well, Tim Whelan got us like out of Tom Finn's into a pub, and it happened to be the Prince Albert, and the numbers used to swell the doors. You couldn't get in. If you weren't there on time, you wouldn't get in. And if you were talking inside, you'd be told to leave that room and let two musicians come in.
And me and Mary Malachi were often told to leave the room.
You know, you've never seen so many musicians in one room. Of all descriptions, Tony O'Brien and Warwick, you know, you had fiddlers, you had flutes, you had John Whelan, of course, used to come in, and Tom Finn.
So, next time you come across some delightful live Celtic instrumental music in and around Adelaide, count yourself lucky that Pat and his Irish musical companions were here in Adelaide at the right time to start it all off and to keep it going.